The conference room went silent when the CEO looked at the black single father's outstretched hand and deliberately walked past it. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The man had traveled across 3 states carrying the future of his company in a worn leather folder, yet in less than 3 seconds, he had been treated as though he didn't belong in the room. What the CEO didn't know was that the quiet father sitting at the end of the table controlled the one decision that could keep his company alive. Before we uncover how one handshake changed everything, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heartline Stories if you believe kindness, dignity, and second chances can change a person's life. His name was Malachi Rowan, a 38-year-old father raising his 8-year-old daughter, Zuri, alone. Every morning began before sunrise. Malachi packed Zuri's lunch, braided her hair as carefully as he could, checked her homework, and then drove her to school before heading to the small technology company he had built from the ground up. He wasn't born wealthy. He had no powerful family behind him. His office was a converted warehouse with mismatched chairs and an aging coffee machine, but his company had developed something extraordinary, a clean energy storage system capable of making renewable power dramatically cheaper for developing communities. After years of rejection, investors had finally begun to notice. A major investment group was prepared to release $300 million in funding, but there was one final condition: Malachi had to partner with Evercrest Industries, one of the largest energy corporations in the country. That was why he walked into Evercrest's headquarters that bright summer morning wearing his best navy suit. His shoes were polished, his folder was organized, and inside his jacket was a small photograph of Zuri smiling beside a science project she had built from recycled batteries. Malachi touched the photograph before entering the boardroom. He had promised his daughter that morning that he would come home with good news. At the head of the enormous glass table sat Evercrest CEO Gideon Vale, a man known for turning struggling companies into billion-dollar empires. Gideon had arrived surrounded by executives, lawyers, and financial advisors. When Malachi entered, everyone stood except Gideon. Malachi smiled, walked toward him, and extended his hand respectfully. Gideon glanced at the hand, looked Malachi up and down, and then turned toward his assistant as though Malachi had never spoken. He simply told everyone to sit down. The handshake remained hanging in the air for a moment before Malachi slowly lowered his hand. The humiliation burned, but Malachi refused to show it. He sat quietly while Gideon questioned his company's valuation, experience, and ability to manage a major investment. The questions became sharper with every minute. Gideon repeatedly suggested that Malachi's company was too small, and that someone with more established leadership should probably take control. Malachi understood exactly what was happening. They weren't questioning his technology anymore. They were questioning whether a black man who had built something valuable deserved to sit at their table. Then Gideon made his biggest mistake. He assumed Malachi needed him more than Evercrest needed Malachi. Gideon confidently explained that Evercrest would consider acquiring Malachi's company for a fraction of its actual value. He expected gratitude. Instead, Malachi calmly opened his leather folder and placed a single document on the table. The room changed instantly. It was a letter from the investment group confirming that $300 million had been approved, pending the final partnership decision. Malachi had already secured the funding. Evercrest wasn't his only option. In fact, the investment group had specifically told him they were willing to proceed with another partner if Evercrest rejected the agreement. For the first time that morning, Gideon looked nervous. Malachi stood and explained that he had come to the meeting hoping to build something together, not to beg for a seat at someone else's table. He said he had spent years being told his ideas were too ambitious, his company too small, and his background too ordinary. But every rejection had taught him something. He had learned that dignity was not something another person could give or take away. Then he closed the folder and walked out. Within 48 hours, the investment group announced that the full $300 million would be directed into Malachi's company through a different strategic partner. The news spread through the financial world. Investors rushed to support the technology. Major cities began requesting pilot programs. Employees who had once worried about losing their jobs celebrated in the warehouse that had become the birthplace of their dream. Evercrest, meanwhile, began to unravel. Gideon had rejected Malachi's proposal because he believed the company could pressure him into accepting less money. But when the market learned that Evercrest had walked away from the technology, its stock began falling. Competitors signed partnerships with Malachi. Analysts questioned Gideon's judgment. Within months, several major clients left Evercrest, and the company entered a financial crisis that forced massive layoffs and emergency restructuring. One afternoon, months after the meeting, Malachi was standing outside his new research center when he noticed an older man waiting near the entrance. It was Gideon. He looked completely different. The expensive confidence was gone. He quietly apologized for what had happened in that boardroom. He admitted that his arrogance had cost thousands of employees their security and nearly destroyed the company he had spent decades building. Malachi listened without anger. Then he told Gideon something he had learned as a father: sometimes the most powerful thing you can do after someone hurts you is refuse to become like them. Malachi offered Evercrest a chance to participate in a community energy project, not as an owner, not as a master, but as a partner. Gideon accepted. That evening, Malachi returned home and found Zuri waiting at the door. She ran into his arms, asking whether he had won. Malachi smiled and lifted her into the air. He told her that winning wasn't about making someone else fall. It was about standing tall when someone tried to make you feel small. Years later, the technology Malachi created helped bring affordable electricity to thousands of families. Schools, clinics, and rural communities gained access to reliable clean power. And whenever reporters asked him about the meeting that changed his life, Malachi never talked about the insult first. He talked about the lesson. He said that sometimes a closed door is not rejection. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes the room that refuses to respect you is simply making space for the room where your worth will finally be recognized. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Heartline Stories so more stories of courage, dignity, and second chances can reach people who need them. Special request: comment, "I will never let someone else's disrespect define my worth," if you believe every person deserves to be treated with dignity. And remember, Malachi's greatest victory was never the $300 million. It was walking away from humiliation without losing his humanity. He proved that success can build a company, but character can change lives. Sometimes the person someone refuses to shake hands with is the very person holding the future they desperately need.